Welcome, everybody. Today we are in a new episode for Mind Your Mind podcast. I am Roxana Parra Sepúlveda, your host, and today I am with Elysia McCaffrey. She is the Chief Executive of the Gangmasters and Labour Abuse Authority in the UK, where she has been in post since June 2021, leading work on the prevention of labour exploitation. Elysia has worked in civil and public services roles for almost 20 years and is passionate about protecting the most vulnerable people in our society. Welcome, Elysia. I'm so happy to have you here. Thank you for being here with me today. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. I'm really excited to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, it's so good to be able to bring a little bit more of knowledge as well, and to get to know about your experience and your work. So first of all, can you tell us a little bit about what the Gangmasters do and what role that you have in the team that you lead? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, of course. So the Gangmasters and Labour Abuse Authority was set up in 2005 in response to a really significant tragedy. So in 2004, there was a tragedy in Morecambe Bay where 23 Chinese cockle pickers lost their lives because they'd been brought to the UK. They were being abused and exploited for labour. They were working in Morecambe Bay collecting cockles on the beach, and they were swept out to sea and they drowned. And it was such a significant tragedy that the government at that time had said this must not happen again. And the response to that was to set up our organisation. We do a number of things. So we're a regulator, first and foremost. We provide licenses to people who want to supply workers into those sectors. So we looked at shellfish, we look at horticulture, agriculture,
I see.
food packaging and so on. So if you want to supply workers into those sectors, you have to meet our licensing standards. You have to demonstrate that you can look after these workers and make sure that what happened in Morecambe Bay in 2004 never happens again. So that's kind of the first thing that we do. We several years after we were set up, we gained enforcement powers. So we have some police style powers. So we can arrest people for exploiting workers, not just in the sectors that we regulate, but in other sectors as well. And we also undertake lots of prevention work. So we look at how can we empower people to stop them from being exploited in the first place, because we know, the situation in Morecambe Bay was at a very extreme end, but there's labour exploitation happening every day in plain sight. And it could be things like people not getting their holiday pay, not being paid minimum wage, right up to and including some of the really serious cases we've had where people have been locked up and kept and held as slaves. So
Yes.
the more we can empower people to speak out, know how to report problems when they is really helpful, and we try to prevent people from becoming victims in the first place. So it's a really big remit that we have, and we do work across England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland with quite a small team. So big job, big ambition.
Yeah, and so important with so much we know is going on with trafficking and illegal migration that is supported by all sorts of situations that put people in great danger. So what, as what brought us here to talk is to talk about the impact on your team, on the people that are doing this job. They are working in implementing standards, in reducing exploitation, in preventing exploitation. Very hard work, and so I wonder if there is aspects of that we can consider kind of red flags for your team, for members of your team that are working in doing this job, that will then let us know that there is certain level of impact. We have spoken in previous episodes about emotional exhaustion, that we know that the witnessing the suffering of others for long periods of time can have, take the toll in our well-being and the way that we feel as workers and as an individual. So is there any signs or any red flags that you, as well as a manager, are keeping an eye on for your team?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? Because when you're working in the front line, you tend to be working with people who are so passionate and so caring and really
Yes.
about the people they're working with. And for me as chief executive, knowing that I've got probably the most caring group of people I've ever met working to protect victims and to help exploited people, it means in some ways, I don't have to worry about, are we doing the right thing? Are we care enough? Because the passion and the commitment for people is so good. But I have to worry about people's mental well-being and how invested they
Yes.
and whether or not they're well. And there's some situations, there's lots of situations that we deal with every day that are quite harrowing for the people who work here. And
Yes.
I'll give you one example where there was a successful prosecution that one of my teams had. They did an absolutely amazing job, where a chap had been held and treated as a slave and kept in a shed for 40 years. The work that my team did with other partners to help this man to rescue and to get him the support that he needed was amazing. And we've got lots and lots of other examples. We've had more convictions recently under the Modern Slavery Act, where we've seen the victim has been able to really kind of step out of this and turn their life around. But when you look at the situation they were kept in, it's incredibly harrowing. And my teams are really personally invested in helping. And I love that. I love that passion. I love that caring. And I think that's, it's really wonderful. If you could bottle that and share it, we could change
Yeah. Yeah,
that.
exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
But the fact is, it is incredibly harrowing. It's
Mm.
and there are some things that we look at in the organisation that are kind of data points, if you like, about how you make sure people are okay. So, we have our officers keep track of their flexi time, so how many hours that they're working. If people are accruing quite a lot of flexi time, you can look at that as the first kind of indicator that people are working more than you'd want them to do. And there's always going to be peaks and troughs, and there's always going to be times when we've got a big job on and people are working quite long hours. And what I would want is that when that job is finished, they can pull it back a little bit and rest and look after themselves. And so looking at where the people are working excessive hours is kind of the first indicator. And then I think as well, looking at, are we always getting through the work? So sometimes, and I think this is quite rare, but it's something that we look out for, for people okay, is people can be working a lot of hours and not necessarily delivering a huge amount of work. And this isn't something I'd say is a kind of common problem at GLAA, but it's something that we look for, because if people are online, working all the hours under the sun, and they're feeling overwhelmed and they're feeling exhausted, so they're not necessarily productive, I think those are really big indicators that people are ramping up to exhaustion or potentially a situation that could affect their mental health. And I've got a responsibility, my managers have got a responsibility to look for that and make sure that we take action and support people if that's the case. Also things like sick absences, people taking time off for things like stress, for things like headaches, for things like, that are the kind of indicators that emotionally people are perhaps not coping as well as you'd really want. And then also, there's a lot we can do at just kind of looking at how are people at work, how are they showing up? It's quite difficult for us because the majority of our team members are spread right across the UK.
Mm.
And so you don't get to see people face to face every day. If you're in an office, you turn up, you see people, you can tell by people's demeanour, how they're presenting at work, whether people are okay. And that's much harder when people are spread out. And we try and do a lot of things where we get to see people, like team meetings, like drop-in sessions, like, just different kind of events where you might get to see if someone's okay and if they're not. And I think you can tell when teams are struggling, when, if there's perhaps a bit of volatility or people appear stressed and they present in a way that is stressed, that kind of cause you to say, okay, we need to think about this. We need to look at the pressure and the workload for that team, because this is not a case of us kind of processing widgets. We're dealing with people in very difficult conversations, and our own personal resilience at that period of time will affect how well we cope with things as well. So I think there's a lot of red flags and a lot of signs to look out for with people.
This is so useful, because one of the things that I have been thinking about in preparation to our conversation today is exactly that. What then is the role of a manager in this whole process? And thank you so much for sharing in so much detail these elements of looking at the number of hours. Is not rare in the work that I do to come across people that are working much more hours than they should be working, and not always their managers are noticing that, either because the protocols within the organizations don't allow, for example, the counting or even the notion of toil. If the notion of toil is not there, then that doesn't give an idea to the managers of what's going on with the number of hours that people need to invest to actually do their job and complete their work. That's a very interesting point. So in a good mechanism, then it could be to look at the number of hours that people are doing. And anyway, that will that obviously put the pressure on the person to ensure that they are counting all the hours, or registering the hours that they are doing. But in the same time, it can be very useful because it will help them as well to notice how much they are doing. And if a week, for example, feels particularly exhausting, and they are looking at the number of hours that they have done that week, that can be a very good point of reference for them as well to take action in terms of how much rest, or if they want to even consider. One of the things that I also think a lot about is the use of holidays. It's easy because people are so committed, and teams sometimes are dealing with such complicated situations with so much complex needs, that to go away for holidays, it may feel that is detrimental for themselves, because then they come back to even more work, or by going away, they are putting more pressure in their peers and so on. So it's an interesting sort of dynamic there with regards with the number of hours and holidays and taking breaks, and how consistent those breaks can be, along in time.
Yeah, I think that annual leave point is a really good point, isn't it? And taking holidays and having that time, I think that there's a responsibility on leaders to take their holiday, to really set that example that we expect this. This is something that you're entitled to. And it's not just that it's an entitlement. It is so important to your well-being, your time with your family, your time with your friends, your time for yourself to just stop thinking about work. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I can walk out on a Friday when I've got a week of leave and forget about work. I don't. And
Nor do I. We need some time to switch off, right?
Yeah, it does. It takes a little while for your brain to start unwinding. And, when any of my team listen to this, they'll probably laugh a bit, because they know that on the Monday when I'm on leave, they tend to get quite a few phone calls from me going, I just remembered, and can you just think about this? And it is something that's quite hard to do. And actually, in some ways, it would be quite easy to just dip in and just check and so on. But there was a situation I found myself in many years ago when I was working in an organisation where the culture was that people kind of dipped in and out when they were on leave. And, I had seen my managers do it, and I was doing it. And there was a woman on my team who was fantastic. And she was, a real kind of star of the future and an up and coming leader. And she was really excited that she was able to step up and deputise for me while I was on leave. And I had my phone with me, and I just checked a few emails, responded to a few emails. And she phoned me up and she said, it makes it look like you don't trust me. And I was horrified because of course I did. And I was so glad that she felt she could tell me that, because she was right. If I can't take my leave, it looks like I don't trust my team to do the job. And it was a real wake-up call for me. And I have tried to be much, much better since then. And so my team know they can contact me when I'm off if there's an emergency. And, I do expect as chief exec to be called if there's an emergency. I am accountable. But I do want every person at every layer of the organisation to be able to take that time for themselves and not feel like they have to keep working, because that switch off, that stop, that pause for our mental well-being, it's absolutely crucial. It's so important.
Essential. It's essential. It's the only way that we can all do our job, really, and maintain a level of resilience. So it's interesting as well that you were touching upon more relational aspects in the way that, for example, paying attention on how you see your team members within meetings, for example. How do you see them, and the other areas of that also have to do with absenteeism. Is that a word? Yes, right? Yeah. And the idea that it makes me think about how sometimes after, to be absent for work is not only because you're ill, but also because there are other issues within your family life, or it could be a bereavement, it could be a divorce, it could be, you know, a moving house, or these kind of situations that are naturally stressful as well, that are part of life. That doesn't mean that you're ill, but maybe it's very useful to consider as well to take a time off when you are dealing with those kind of situations.
Yeah, we're all human, and we all only
Yes.
have so much capacity for dealing with stress and for coping with things. And, you know, there's a well-known saying, and I have no idea who to attribute it to, but, you know, that on your deathbed, you won't be saying, I wish I'd spent more time at the office. And
Yes, that's
when,
true.
when, you know, our families are important, and, you know, time to do things like grieve, you know, like deal with, you know, the end of a relationship or moving house or any of these really stressful situations, we do need to be able to stop and say, actually, I've got to focus on this now. And we have, you know, a lot across a lot of the public sector and civil service, there's really good policies for people being allowed to take that time. But if managers have a responsibility to say, you need to focus on this now for you, and that's important. And often people find it hard to let stuff go, and you think, oh no, but I want to be still having an ear in at work and know what's going on. But actually, big picture, it's not healthy. We only have so much capacity, and, you know, you can cope with a very stressful situation better if you're able to focus on that without also thinking about this at work and that at work. And, you know, I think it's important that we set an example as leaders that that time should be taken, and people's overall well-being, their experience outside of work, in their family life, in, you know, moving home or whatever it might be, is incredibly important to the overall well-being.
Yeah. Yes. And what I'm hearing as well so strongly from what you're saying is that as managers, when I was a manager as well, I was well aware of that sort of the way that you work, the way that you are. It kind of sets. I'm hesitant to say it sets an example, but I think it is, no? And is that notion of, if you are a manager that is working endlessly during the weekends and so on, your team will feel less ready or entitled or happy to, or comfortable actually asking for time off, or disconnected, or being disconnected, or working the 9 to 5, which are the hours that they are contracted to do, you know, or whatever the number of hours are. But I think that's that element of the presence of the manager has an impact on the team. And there is a work of self-awareness as well, I think, as a manager, to be able to lead and to create teamwork, a healthy teamwork. I have been thinking a lot about how a team is built, no? And we have been talking a little bit about this in other episodes as well, in terms of how do we relate to our team members in a way that we need them to know that we are there. You know, we need to know that our team knows that we are doing what we're doing, because that creates as well a sense of, I'm not alone here. No?
Yeah, everything that we do as leaders casts a shadow, doesn't it? And every message we send, every email we send, the timing of that, the way we conduct ourselves in meetings, the way we conduct ourselves in the office, all of that sets a signal, whether consciously or unconsciously, to the teams around us about what we think is accepted behaviour at work, and whether that is, you know, working hard, not working too hard, not doing too many hours, and that kind of thing. Or the opposite can be true. You know, if people see that their manager doesn't take their work seriously and they're slacking off, that sets the tone as well.
Absolutely.
And, you know, it's something I often talk about at work, is that phrase, you know, the shadow that we cast. What is that? How are we showing up? How do people see us? And how do people feel that? Because people are looking to leaders all the time for the example about how we should be at work, and setting really healthy habits in the way that we speak to each other, the kindness that we show to each other, the respect that we show to each other. And, that respect then extends, doesn't it, into the way we, look after each other's mental health and look after the hours that we work and protect our teams and so on. It's really vital.
Yeah, absolutely. I was writing a very short piece around kindness the other day. It makes me think about that, and this notion of kindness can be a chain of kindness, that wraps around in the way that creates more kindness. It replicates and it sometimes takes very little to create that atmosphere of kindness and compassion. Do you think there are some particular challenges or stressors that are relevant to the particular field of working with exploitation?
Yeah, there really are. I mean, one of the biggest challenges that we have is that the people that we work with who are victims of exploitation, or often victims of exploitation, don't necessarily recognise that they are a victim. And, they might find themselves in quite difficult situations and they don't know how to get out of that. So the reports that we get, we have an intelligence team who receive information about what's happening with exploitation. It's not that often that people phone up and say, I feel I'm being exploited. We get reports from other agencies, we get reports from members of the public, if they've interacted with a service like a hand car wash or a nail bar or something where they think, I'm a bit worried about the people working there. But quite often people are feel that this is the best that they can get, and they might be being underpaid, they might not be getting holiday pay, they might not be being treated well at all, they might not be given the right PPE to do their jobs and that kind of thing. But quite often people think this is the best situation I'm going to find myself in. And so that puts a huge amount of pressure and stress on our officers who are there to really help. And it's quite often difficult to get underneath a situation if victims don't recognise themselves as victims. And that's particularly challenging around exploitation. And I think as well, there's often that we see people who they're okay, they're just not being paid quite enough, and we can help them to resolve that, or they've not had the holiday pay and we recover a huge amount of money and holiday pay for people and give that back to them, and people's well-being tends to be okay around that. But when you're dealing with much more harrowing end of the scale, and you've got people who are continuing to work for their exploiters because their family at home have been threatened with physical harm if they don't, and so on, it's quite difficult for our officers to get underneath that and really help people. And we've got a huge amount of success stories. We've done a lot of work that's made a real difference in people's lives, but the kind of hidden nature of exploitation makes it really hard for our officers to do their work.
I'm wondering if the nature of the work they do produce different kind of stressors, and that can then impact in different ways, depending on the role that you have and depending on the field that you're working in, knowing that anyway they're working with survivors of traumatic experiences, but each traumatic experience as well, like for example in the case of exploitation, will have its own characteristics, no?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And, some of the cases that we deal with are incredibly harrowing. And, we've got wonderful, wonderful people who work here who care really deeply, and you can't not develop an attachment to that situation. And, especially when you look at situations where you think, that could have been me, that could be my child, that could be my neighbour, that could be, a relative in some way. The vulnerability of people and that helplessness is really affecting, and I think it really affects our officers. These are not, people who have gone into these situations with their eyes open. Quite often, they don't know what situation is that they're going to find themselves in. They've not made choices to be in these situations. And I think that for our officers, when you're dealing with really vulnerable people, it's very hard to stop at the end of the day and say, right, job done, and walk away. It's really affecting.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is where then all what is related to self-care strategies that are personalized, that are really meaningful to yourself, can play a good part, because we know that we need to work in that ending, or sort of giving a closure to a stressful situation, and that may sometimes need a debriefing or something else? No, do you within your team, do you have any activities like, I don't know, reflective practices or any other activities that may support that closure of the day after stressful situations?
Well, we've got the most wonderful team of mental health first aiders who are all volunteers from right across the business, who've had their mental health first aider training and are really visible, and they're there for people to talk to if they need to at all. They run, they're so wonderful, they're so enthusiastic about this. They run these time to talk sessions where a mental health first aid will reach out to you, and I get the call as well, and I absolutely love it, and I always take them up on the offer. They reach out and say, do you want to talk? And you get, a chance to sit down for half an hour or an hour, whatever you want, and just talk, with a trained mental health first aider or whatever's on your mind. So there doesn't have to be anything bad happening at that time, just it is time that we allow and time that we like people to take. And I know that when I've had the time to talk sessions, I walk out the room, a couple of inches taller, because
That's great.
It's great to talk about mental health, and just to share experiences, I think, is really wonderful. We've also introduced a concept of a wellbeing hour where people can take an hour to go and do something for themselves, and they can have that as work time. So they can go for a walk, they can go and take a yoga class, they can just go and do something which helps you with your wellbeing. It's something that we take incredibly seriously at GLAA. We had a terrible situation. So a gentleman that I didn't know before my time, it's one of our former chief executives, really sadly took his own life while here, and there were a lot of our officers here who knew him well. And I think that when something happens like that, and he was very well respected, very well loved, and it was a real shock to the organisation, you can't ignore something like that. And I think when something like that happens, even though, as I say, I didn't know him, but there's a few chief execs before me, but you can still really see the mark that leaves, and the kind of the scars on people's hearts from that, from that experience. And I think that is always a bit of a reminder in our heads about the real importance of this. This isn't tokenistic. This isn't, something to tick a box and say, well, of course we look after wellbeing. It's really important, and it's a real core part of who we are as an organisation.
Thank you for saying that. You make me think about the hashtag of this podcast, which is "selfish is kind." And the very reason why that's there is because so many times self-care is seen as, being selfish, or not, being with guilt, and it's something that is difficult to do, or something that we have on our to-do list, but really we don't never get to do, and so on. No, it's like, I should be doing this, I should be doing that. I hear a lot of that. But I feel that with these initiatives, like the wellbeing hour, for example, sounds amazing. Do you think, as in your experience as a manager, do you have challenges in implementing these wellbeing strategies?
Yeah.
In terms of the response, because how do you bring people to actually take the wellbeing hour?
Yeah, it's really hard, actually. We the majority of people at GLAA are men, and I mean, it's in the nicest possible way. Men are not as good as women at talking about their mental health or recognise challenge.
We know that.
I recognise some of my colleagues will listen to this and roll their eyes at that point, and they're welcome to. But we do find this kind of, I'm fine, or this sense that, not just at GLAA, all over the place.
Yes.
Talking about wellbeing or talking about mental health is in some way showing some weakness. And I think that the stigma around mental health and the stigma around talking about these things is changing. I can see that, when you just look at social media, you can see people are really pushing, the need to talk, and particularly thinking about, International Men's Day in November, which is often focused on mental well-being, because society has taught our men that it is a weakness. We bring our boys up to not cry. Big boys don't cry, and all that kind of stuff. And we condition, our men and boys that actually it's the wrong thing. You shouldn't be talking about mental health. You've got to toughen up. You've got to be a man. All that kind of stuff, which just leads to really significant problems.
Yes, and And the idea of mental well-being then gets sort of put aside. I think one of the things that I observed is that after the pandemic, or with the pandemic, mental health and mental well-being has become more mainstream somehow, and everybody got to understand a little bit more about the importance that of mental well-being. It's not only important to look after our physical health, but it's also important to look for our mental well-being. And there is so many ways of doing it, and I think in this field in particular, the fact that we are so committed and looking for others' needs also plays a part, plus all what you have said, in that sometimes we see so much need out there, and you see how great is the need in certain fields, that it's very difficult to connect with their own needs, no? And especially when you are not used to do it, because we haven't been not encouraged to do it.
Yeah, I think, your example there of the pandemic is great, because I think that previously people have thought if they're struggling with their mental health, they're struggling alone. And then because people don't talk about it, and it's not like breaking your arm where you wear a cast and people can see it. So people hide it and, create this kind of shame around it and don't want to talk about it. Whereas the pandemic, I think, set an example that every single person in the world is under a huge amount of stress at the moment. We're all in the same boat, and we should all be able to talk about that. And I think that actually, that the pandemic has kind of helped to normalize talking about this a little bit, because everyone could say we're under so much stress.
Yes, absolutely. And we know that there is a lot of stigma, and depending on the cultures that we come from as well, there will be different approaches to mental well-being as well. Do you think, according to your experience, is there is anything that works particularly well when thinking about self-care strategies for the frontline workers in dealing with trafficking?
I think that you've got to lead by example. So I think, we talked before about leaders casting a shadow and so on. There's a balance between kind of showing your team that you're vulnerable as well, and that, we all have challenges, we all find things hard. You've got to get the balance right into not overburdening your teams with your own problems.
Absolutely.
Setting that example that it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to say, my goodness, this is really hard today. I found that hard. How did you find that? I think that's important. And I think that works across any area where you're dealing with really difficult situations. One of the things that I see within my teams, and I think you'll see in, lots of frontline areas, is a real kind of camaraderie and closeness between the people who work together, because they've got that shared experience. And, one of the things that I talk about, a lot with colleagues is kind of, who are your friends at work? And this, of course, they all think we're not here to make friends. It's kind of true. We're not necessarily at work to be popular and all of that kind of thing, but actually having the people that you found your common ground with, that you can talk to and say, that was awful, I found that really hard, and know that you can do that kind of privately and share, is really important. And I think that it's quite hard in GLAA because our teams are so dispersed.
Mm-hmm.
To do jobs, but then they're not necessarily seeing each other in the office the next day because they're working from home. And you might have someone who is based in Coventry working with someone who's based in Wales ordinarily. You build a relationship on that day, work on a job, and then go back to your own homes. And you've got to make time for that human connection. And it is a particular challenge for us with the dispersed teams. You can't just say, right, come on, let's go and have a coffee together, let's go and do this, because geographically it doesn't always work. And so I worry at times about officers who are sat at home in their own homes, not geographically close to anybody else, and have they got that friendship, have they got that connection, that relationship, that person to talk to? And it doesn't always work with talking to your family because they've not had that experience. There's something about being able to talk to someone who's had that shared experience with you that's really valuable for people's well-being.
Absolutely. And that's also something that I'm seeing as well as a probably a result of the pandemic that now so many people works from home. You obviously in the field that you're working, you need to be like that, but sometimes we are in the same city working from home, and that or not coinciding with people in the office the same days when there is an hybrid kind of arrangement, and that it somehow has created a little bit more of isolation, no, for some, because teams not always have that time to get together. And also is, is that I think it's important to consider that point of connection, that point of getting together, that point of checking in with each other, knowing, or even if you have not hear much or seen a colleague for a while, drop an email, drop a message. How are you? Is everything okay? Sort of, it is important that we not only we get used to ask for help, but also to sometimes just drop an email to someone that you haven't seen for a while. Probably that can create a massive change in their life as well as it will in yours. So is this element of isolation, I think, is even more present now that we are dealing with.
Yeah, I mean, I love the way that home working has become normalized as a result of the pandemic, because I think that before the pandemic, you might work from home on the odd day and you'd panic. If my dog would bark in the background, which one of them was just barking a second ago, you think, oh, I look so unprofessional now. Or if you've missed a call because you've gone to make a cup of tea, oh, they must think I'm not working. That was the culture before around home working. Now we get it more, I think. And I love it when we're on a call and someone's kid comes and sits in their lap or comes to get their the iPad password reset or whatever, because I think that what we've done is we've made the workplace more accessible to people who are parents, who are carers, who have other things going on in their life. And that can only be a good thing for diversity and inclusion, and it can only be a good thing to connect. But you're absolutely right that connection with your colleagues can be lost, and you've got to get that balance, because the colleagues that I know best are the ones that I see in the office, who I bump into at the tea point, and you can say, how was your weekend? What did you get up to? How are your kids? How's your mum now? All of that stuff that's not really work-based, but builds those relationships and that connection, which is so vital to your well-being and how you feel at work and about work.
Yeah, and feeling, that sense of belonging and being part of the team and connected with the people that you work with. Do you have any tips to share in the sense of for other managers? And we have been talking in terms of the manager's shadow. We have talked about lots of initiatives, but if a manager is considering to sort of start and is just starting to think about implementing well-being strategies within their teams, do you have any tips to share in terms of where to start with the development of a well-being strategy?
So I think the first thing is for leaders to think about what they themselves need from a leader, because quite often you can ask a leader, how should a leader behave? And they'll describe a set of behaviours, and then how do you behave? And they might describe something different. And I think what you need to think about is, what do I need from a leader? So therefore, what do my people need? How do I show up in the way that I need a leader to show up? And it sounds like quite a simple thing, but quite often what we think a leader should do and then our own actions aren't necessarily aligned. And we all want to be the best leaders for our team. So we need to think about, am I showing up in the right way? Am I setting that right example? And, for all of us, the relationship we have with our manager completely affects how we feel about our work. You can, or I can, I mean, other people are different, but I know there's jobs that I've done that are in the past that are a bit boring, a bit tedious, but the relationship I've had with my manager has kept me really enthused and kept me feeling valued and rewarded and all of that kind of thing. So that relationship is really important. So for leaders to think about, how do I show up? And is that the way that I need? Is that the way that I would want? And am I doing the right thing for my teams? Is the first thing. I think as well, asking your colleagues what they need. What do you need for your well-being? How are you feeling today? Checking in at the start of meetings or one-to-ones. Just, how are you feeling? Are you taking time for yourself? What are you doing? Because I know myself, when things start to get busy and when the pressure increases at work, the first things to go are those things that I do for my own mental well-being.
Absolutely.
So And it's terrible because we know what we're doing, and actually forcing yourselves to keep those habits. So one of the things for me, my husband is a yoga teacher, so I can't escape the yoga. I can't just cancel a class. If I'm going to class, I'm going to class. And
That's wonderful.
it is, and he's just a little plug for him. He's a fantastic yoga teacher, but he does a lot of sort of relaxation with the class. And I know I've never once been to one of his classes and come out feeling worse. I always come out feeling better, even if it's only a little bit better. But when I'm really busy and we're getting to the time where we'd be leaving for the venue that he teaches from, I say, "Oh, I'm really up against it. I don't think I can." And, you know, we always have the same conversation. And then I go and put my yoga clothes on and off we go. Because I think we need to look for those things. And I think conversations with your teams about what are those things that you do for your well-being that are important, and how do you make them a non-negotiable? And actually,
Absolutely.
I think having them in your team meeting, saying what's a red line for you, you know, go around the room, what is non-negotiable for you? Because it might be, you know, somebody just taking 10 minutes out in the middle of the day to go and walk their dog. Protect that. You know, it might be that actually I've got a hard stop at 4 o'clock because I'm going to go and pick my children up from school and I'm going to take them to the park. And that these things should be talked about and they should be protected, I think.
It's exactly the words that I was thinking of, what you were saying, giving the example of, yeah, those non-negotiable are so essential. And it's interesting because what I'm hearing, what we are talking about here is about self-awareness. Not only for the manager to be practicing that sense of self-awareness in terms of what do they need, and stop to think about that and to have that reflective space as well for the managers. Don't lose sight that we are all human. And if we are a manager, we are still a human with lots of work, but still a human. And to identify those non-negotiables, that very line, no, that we draw. And also there is this element of what people is prepared to hear, you know, when we are making those questions of how are you, how are things, or is there anything that I need to know, etc. How prepared we are to actually listen. And we know that people connect better when they feel listened, understood, and that's something that I think what I want to emphasize with what we're saying here, that this is not a mechanical questioning that needs to happen. Okay, let's check in and everybody check in, but really, let's check in. Let's give that a space to say how actually am today. And because from wherever you are, is there from where we can work, is from there where we can carry on with the day, with the task on hand. And it's important. Sometimes there is a lot of very useful, important information to understand how the work can be impacted as well, no? With what we have on hand. Everything so much important, so many important elements of how to approach this work. We're reaching the end of today. And I'm wondering if there is anything in particular that you would have liked to say that we haven't covered today, and if you want to take the time for that.
I think you just triggered a thought in me when you were talking about listening to people. And something that I have learned is that multitasking is a bit of a myth. None of us can really multitask. And, you know, if you're talking to somebody and they go, yeah, I'm listening, but they're still typing an email or they're still on the phone, they're not really listening. And everybody needs to be heard. And there's a book I read a long time ago, which I recommend to everyone to read. It's called Fish Philosophy. And there's some really simple philosophies in there for just kind of how to be your best at work. And one of the philosophies is about being present when you're talking to people. They know if you're listening to them. They know if they've got your full attention. And we all need to be heard. And that is so vital. So I think for all leaders, all managers, all colleagues, whatever sector you're working in, that is a principle that really applies. And we all need that, don't we?
Yes.
So yeah, I think that's probably it.
Yeah, fantastic. What a wonderful way to finish. And because we have also a lot of people listening today. And I'm very, very pleased and thankful to you because we have bring the element of managerial work. You know, what is the perspective of the manager? And that's something that I'm thinking more and more is so essential because frontline workers are working in between their organizations and the demands of their field, you know, the demands of the patients and the service users that they are working with. And it's important to bear in mind both. This is not self-care, should not be only in the hands of the person that is there in the front line, but also on the hands of the organizations and therefore the managers too. So thank you so very much. I appreciate the conversation we have had today. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much. You too.